Hello, all, and welcome back to the Everlasting Man Book Club. I am your host, Susan Sutcher, here with my co host, Gretelyn Darkey. And I am so pleased today to have Tim Streiff as our special guest. He is the program manager for Thriving in Rural Ministries from Catholic Rural Life, which is a 100-year-old nonprofit in the Catholic Church dedicated to helping those in rural life. He grew up outside of Minneapolis and he is married to his beautiful wife, Mary Jane, and they live in St. Paul, Minnesota. But I wanted him to tell us a little bit. He recently joined as a knight, which is super exciting. He's a frequent, a very faithful attendee at the conference. So I wanted him to introduce himself a little and tell us why the society meant so much to him that he thought he might want to be a part of it in a more in a financial way, as well as being such a faithful friend for so many years. So welcome.
Thanks. Thanks, Susan. I've always loved the Society of G.K. Chesterton. I've been an avid reader of Chesterton since I was in college, and I think I've been coming to the conference for about 10 years, and I've been a member of a local society almost as long. And it was if I can say this, I specifically canceled my Netflix account so that I could free up a little extra money in my budget to become a knight.
Much better for your soul. Membership in the Society of G.K.
Absolutely.
Chesterton will get you closer to heaven than your Netflix account.
Yes.
I can guarantee you that. So that's great. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you're with us. And Gretelyn, welcome back. It's always wonderful to see your smiling face. And
Same. Thank you.
We are so blessed to be able to do this in the apostolate. We really love this. So I do have an icebreaker. I know everybody's like waiting with bated breath for that. So my question, and this is not an easy one, is when or where have you felt closest to God? And I am going to start with Gretelyn. Well, actually, I'll start with myself just to get mine out of the way. And it's probably cheating a little bit, but I'm a mom. I've got 9 children, and I can honestly say that that entire, like, probably right before I give birth to like right after I give birth, when you think you might just die and then you don't, and then you're really giving up your whole person for this other person, I think is the closest that I feel to God, because I'm able to sort of, like, in a small way, participate in that sacrifice of Christ on the cross, where he gave up his body for us. In a way, I feel like that type of sacrifice, I do home births like in a tub, so it's not as anesthetized, I'll put it that way. And it's a really intense experience. And I'm grateful for those experiences, because I feel like that's kind of it's like a liminal space where, the veil is thin at birth, I think, and the veil is thin at death. If you've been in the room when somebody's passed away, you feel that liminal space. I feel that when I bring a soul into the world. So really treasure those moments. So that is when I felt closest to God. How about you, Gretelyn?
That's such a hard question. And of course, I can't say me too when I have kids, but we don't all have natural births at the society, but Susan and I do.
Yes.
I don't get to do them at home, but anyway, yeah, that's a very good one. But like, there have been some like kind of interesting aha moments that I think God has given me. Thankfully, there was one time I was attending mass. It was like a very run-of-the-mill Sunday mass. It was like the music was bad, the people were dressed inappropriately. It was very like normal American mass. And I was sitting there judging people after communion like I do, God bless me. And like God gave me this wonderful moment of like, this is my body. And it was like the people. And there was and it was a grace of a moment to see Christ in these people that I was sitting there judging. But it really shook me in a very good way to be like, oh, this is how they're to be seen.
Right.
Not the way I was seeing them a second ago. So that's just one instance of a moment that certainly felt like it was straight from God. So
that's beautiful. And how about you, Tim?
Yeah, well, I think one of the places or times that I feel the closest to God is just in kind of some small intimate moments. Um, I've been to Rome, I've been to Mass, with 10 or 20,000 people. I was at the National Eucharistic Congress, where there were 50 or 60,000, which was overwhelmingly beautiful. It was incredible. But really, the thing that stands out to me, I love the sacraments and being able to go, um, to a mass where there's just like kind of two or three people, and the celebrant really well, and it feels like, gosh, is this the early church? Where like you're super intimate with these people who
Mhm.
are around you, and the maybe the usually when this happens, it's a priest who has had a really impactful moment,
Mhm.
or it's been a really good relationship in my life. And so being able to have those just kind of the church in a microcosm kinds of moments is usually when I feel like I'm standing on the precipice before something immense and I am tiny.
Mm.
Yes.
It's just really beautiful in those moments.
Mm.
Oh, what a beautiful, humbling way to experience the presence of God. And we have a lot of responses. I'm going to mention a few of them. Bob says, waiting for his wife to be at the front of the cathedral at our wedding and throughout
Aw.
numerous medical challenges and adventures. I've essentially lived 55 years past my warranty. Yeah, we understand that, some of us. And Freddie, it's whenever he's at church.
Mm.
And like Tim said, sometimes it's the ordinary things. It doesn't have to be something super extraordinary. It's in our ordinary life. And Walt, our shade tree mechanic, says, for me, it's when he had a supernatural mistrial experience. One of those was at a GKC conference. Yeah, that is a place to get closer to God. And Judy says a few times when she's suffering,
Mm.
God sent me angels in disguise to help and comfort me. And yeah, I think that's definitely an experience of the body of Christ. It's a beautiful thing. And Karen says, in confession, yes. Oh yeah, that's a great place to meet God. And I've met him there too. St. Anthony's Shrine in Boston. I'll have to put that on my list. I haven't been to that one. Although when we were in Boston, we were eating in an Italian restaurant, and maybe it was his feast day, or maybe it was just they do it a lot, but they were processing down the street with the beer and the Saint Anthony on the beer, and there was like lots of money and
Mhm.
frivolity, and looked like they were having a very good time. So I, I I met Saint Anthony in Boston, but I was eating a lobster roll while I did it, so it was not in a church or a shrine. And Lisa, during the consecration at communion and at adoration, of course, those are places. And and Kenneth, I've done this recently with my children, laying under a tree and staring up into the sky and feeling his smile upon me.
Mm.
His beautiful creation is definitely a place that we can feel the closest to God. And we've all experienced that. And I think it's very valuable because you said as a child, but shouldn't we all be like children? So maybe that needs to be the homework assignment for the book club is go find a tree, lay underneath it, look up and feel close to God. Chesterton would strongly approve of that, I think. So that's excellent. All right. So we're going to thank you for all your comments. I love all of our participants, and I'm so grateful for all of you that you have joined us so faithfully every week. And we are going to get into the discussion of the strangest story in the world. So we're using the questions at the back of our chosen edition, which is Dale Ulquist's beautiful annotated edition of The Everlasting Man, published by Word on Fire. And his first question for us is, what is more important to us on a personal level than on the level of historical speculations? So, um, so this is it's sort of a content question. I guess the quote that I felt like really answered it from the book was that Christ was and is the most merciful of judges and the most sympathetic of friends is a fact of considerably more importance in our own private lives than in anybody's historical speculation.
Mm.
So, what is Chesterton pointing to with that observation? This merciful judge and this sympathetic friend. What does that mean for us on a personal level? Why is that important than these historical ideas of like who was Christ and did he exist and all of these other kind of questions? Do you want to start with that question, Tim?
Yeah, I think what was really striking to me, especially when I was kind of thinking over this question, was I should say, is the way that Christ is. He's in history. He enters into time in the fullness of time, like that has a real meaning to it.
Mhm.
That it's important that it happened when it did. Um, but then it's also that the incarnation is also this kind of timeless thing as well. Where I think of some great quotations from Pope Benedict. For example, about the faith being an encounter with a person, not
Mhm.
not a historical reflection on someone who lived 2,000 years ago, but someone who's alive today, and has this kind of impact in our life. I think it's really incredible. I did a little bit of academics. I have a master's degree in theology. I think sometimes in this way, but then it's more important, more fundamental to our experience of the faith to have this, individual personal connection
Mhm.
um, to Christ, and know that it's ever ancient, ever new. We gotta throw in some Saint Augustine, right, for his feast day today.
Yeah, wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's a great observation, especially when we looked at our answers about when we felt closest to God. Those were all very personal. Nobody really mentioned when they were, studying about the, hypostatic union was the time that they really, that's when they had this epiphany, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with studying that. I mean, you have a master's in theology. Clearly, there's importance in knowing our faith, but that encounter with God on a personal level happens through other people, through the sacraments, through creation, and it's a very personal and individual type of thing. So
Kind of
I think
reminds you
that's
of Chesterton's comments on Thomas Aquinas in his book on Aquinas. He's talking about when he wrote the music for and the liturgy for Corpus Christi, and there's
mhm,
sort of this idea that like he was this great theologian and he sort of like broke into a love song basically for God.
mm,
And it was the most beautiful thing, so beautiful that, St. Bonaventure is said to have thrown his work on the fire. So it's just this wonderful idea of of being able to bring Christ to a personal level that is really what makes him matter, right?
right. And the merciful judge that he talks about, the sympathetic of friends, is it reminds me of last week when we saw the icon where Christ was both, the friend that loves us and also the judge, and how that can come together in the same person who loves us so much he's willing to correct our sins, who loves us so much he wants us to see the Father, so we, through our relationship with him, can become closer to God, and then eventually join him in heaven. I mean, what a beautiful gift he's given us. So the next question that Dale asks us is, what is the appeal of the cult of virginity, and what is its mystical quality? So yeah, this is mentioned in here. Gretelin, did you want to go ahead and start with this one, and then we'll have Tim follow up?
Sure. I'll just read off the quote that you chose to illustrate this. I think it's great. The pagan world, as such, would not have understood any such thing as a serious suggestion that a child is higher or holier than a man. It would have seemed like a suggestion that a tadpole is higher or holier than a frog. To the merely rationalistic mind, it would sound like saying that a bud must be better than a ripe one. In other words, this modern feeling is an entirely mystical feeling. It is quite as mystical as the call to virginity. In fact, it is the call to virginity. And he talks too about the pagan antiquity had the idea of the holiness, more of the holiness of the
Mhm.
virgin than of the child, and like it's this idea of flipping things on their head, right? Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. You take over, Tim.
And that's on page 330,
Yes,
336, right?
yes, thank
Yes.
you. Yes, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I one of the things that I really love about this chapter, and I know we'll get into some of this more later, um, is just the way that Chesterton kind of demonstrates, really clearly using a number of examples from the gospel.
Hmm.
that Christ is human and more than human without contradicting his humanity,
Hmm.
while at the same time contradicting what individual humans would do. And it's interesting that kind of the ancient world had kind of these cults of virginity. You had the Vestal virgins and the oracles and that they knew that there was something sacred and set apart about human sexuality and the relationship between that and the divine, and recognizing the fall, and all these things kind of coming together, and that there is that element in Christianity, but then at the same time, it's not anything like what any of the pagan cults of virginity. We don't worship creation. We worship with creation, elements of creation, including our bodies,
Hmm.
and that these things are held together in those things. And that's all that stuff kind of just raced through my mind in that line about um, the cult of virginity,
Hmm.
and just how singular and amazing Christianity is, and I mean specifically how Christ is, um, for that, and then it kind of is just rooted in the fact that, well, Christ himself chose a celibate life,
Hmm.
uh, and we we find that beautiful.
We
Hmm.
find that beautiful in a like divinized or purified way. It's not like these Vestal virgins in their diaphanous garments, and they're very seductive, but they're also unattainable. It's this really pure, like a child view of this innocence. Like Christ is this he's elevated it. He took all of humanity by his incarnation and elevated it and made us be able to become children of God, in a way that humanity was not redeemed before that, the second Adam. So I think it's just a beautiful sort of like reflection. It's prefigured, but then it's fulfilled, in a way that only Christ could fulfill that. And so I think we
Yeah.
see Chesterton referring to that over and over, that Christ took these things that were shadows or intimations, but then turned them into something else entirely that is not a direct analogy, but we could see the prefigurement. We could see where society was looking for it. And then he gave it, in a very pure and perfect way. So Peter Pan does not belong to the world of Pan, but to the world of Peter. What does this mean? I like this. This is very provocative, to say Peter Pan's, not really a fairy tale, but is somehow related to the first pope. What does that mean? Why is he getting away with this? What does he mean by that, Tim? Do you
Um,
agree?
I do, yeah. I think there's so much going on in this kind of Chestertonian inversion in this,
Mm-hmm.
just in this one line. I I really wish that I could read things the way that Chesterton did. Just his deep appreciation and reflection on other authors' works just is, I mean, it's so far beyond my abilities. And I, I mean, obviously, the world of Pan is talking about, the pagan myths, and that sort of thing. But then I like the connection sort of to fairy tales in that, and that there's something really interesting, and I've been reflecting on this lately about the way that especially Tolkien and Lewis and Chesterton and George MacDonald use fairy tales, and then Tolkien drawing on the kind of some of the old English poems, Beowulf and things like that. The way that there's kind of this, well, Susan, you said it really well, the shadow of things going on sort of in the non-Jewish world, prior to Christ, where you could see these things as kind of echoes, but that, um, yeah, I think ultimately everything is kind of subjected or comes into Christ. It's all kind of brought together, and the good elements are baptized and
Mm,
kind of brought to their fulfillment uh,
mm.
in the person of Christ. Which then it seems like Chesterton kind of plays on that later on in the chapter. Um, the kind of the third cave,
Mhm.
in the story of human history.
I love
Yeah.
that baptizing things, that we can embrace these things because Christ has elevated them. It's a beautiful way, because I feel like Chesterton's spirituality is kind of, in Catholicism in general, is like a both and kind of thing.
Mm.
Of course we have Christ, but Christ allows us to really appreciate all of the other things, because we can see them through this new lens, through this relationship with Christ that we have, and He's made all things new. And then all things can work together for the glory of God. Even these myths or these fairy tales, it's really beautiful that we get to have all of it, and we can baptize it and claim it as our own.
Yeah, and
Gretelin?
I think it really plays into what we were talking about before too. Like obviously Chesterton, such an organized mind, right? He's continuing on with his earlier thought, even though it doesn't even seem like it. So, he talks about virginity as a way to sort of venerate the child, because the child is the purest thing, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, chat, because it's been a while since I've deep dived into Greek myth, but I cannot think of a Greek myth where there was a child who like was the hero.
Mm,
I can't. And Pan, like that's not Pan usually gets a not happy ending because Pan's kind of a jerk. Um, but like Peter Pan can be a little bit of a nuisance, but he's this kid who likes to have fun and doesn't want to grow up and beats the adults, right? So there's this like sort of topsy-turvydom going on here,
mm.
specifically in this kind of fairy tale. Because, some of the German fairy tales that I also love don't have happy endings either.
So
Uh,
dark.
it's so dark. Go read The Robber Bridegroom to your kids before bed and see how they sleep. Um, they'll sleep better than you will. But anyway, yeah, there's this beautiful idea throughout, and it's sort of like brings the incarnation into play again and again, that this idea of the child being the sort of top of the pyramid of the family is this new idea that is initiated by Christianity and was impossible before.
Beautiful. Yeah, paradox is at the heart of Christianity and also at the heart of Chesterton's writing. So, Chesterton says there is nothing so perfect in all art and literature as the three planes of the parable of the lilies of the field. What are the three planes working all at once? So I'm going to go ahead and read a passage from 338, and then we can discuss it. There is perhaps nothing so perfect in all language or literature as the use of these three degrees in the parable of the lilies of the field, in which he seems first to take one small flower in its hand and note its simplicity and even its impotence. Then suddenly expands it in flamboyant colors into all the palaces and pavilions full of a great name in national legend and national glory, and then yet by a third overturn shrivels it to nothing once more with a gesture as if flinging it away. And if God so clothes the grass that today and tomorrow is cast into the oven, how much more? There is nothing that really indicates a subtle and, in the true sense, a superior mind so much as this power of comparing a lower thing with a higher, and yet that higher with a higher still, of thinking on all three planes at once. And first of all, I want to say, like, his description of the lily, we've heard it, even Solomon wasn't clothed in all of the splendor, but when he relates that story, that suddenly expands it in flamboyant colors into all the palaces and pavilions full of a great name, like, his mystical mind, when he describes things that are mystical, he really takes it beyond, like, I'm like, oh yeah, not even Solomon in all his splendor, and I'm thinking like some old guy with purple robe, maybe a little ermine collar, I don't know, but it's not as like it. I don't think flamboyant and colors and glory and palaces and pavilions, and Chesterton really, I think, illuminates that and draws us into the gospel in a way that shows an intimate relationship with the person who wrote it, that he really sees God's intention and really the fuller truth of what he's trying to say, instead of just looking at it from a very literal or, I guess maybe muted perspective or scholarly perspective. He's willing to enter in and have a mystical experience when he's thinking about the glory of the way that God would splend. Like, we're limiting God sometimes. I think I limit God with my purple robe and my little fur collar. And Chesterton's more willing to allow God to be who God is, I think. That's one thing I noted from that. But what else do you guys think we can get from this passage? Gretelin?
That's pretty great, but we have such little minds. I mean,
Yes.
I was a lit major, and we talk about simile and we talk about metaphor, and it's always just one thing to another thing and this to that. And he really is pointing out that like this is just a microcosm of Christ's ability to just go wherever he wanted on the mental planes. Like, forget 3 even. He's all over them, 10, 20, whatever, at all times, because again, like you said, Tim, like, he's human, he's more than human. Um, yeah, this tension between the divine nature and the human nature. It's a really for people who have even just like studied literature, and it's like there's nobody that does this. Like, this is it.
Right.
It's Christ. So
It's really
it's gorgeous. Yeah.
It is. I want to George has an objection to what I said, so I really want to bring this out because I love people, challenging me. I think this is great. So I object a bit to your first formulations. I think Chesterton challenges this division between the mind and the heart by making his theology art. Often my strongest feelings come from this unity. And I have to say, I think that I agree with you, George. And I don't think I intended to make an opposition there. I just think Chesterton's really good at elucidating things. But what do you guys think about that? I think that he does challenge the division between. I don't think there is a division between the mind and the heart. I think we're one. Like, I think we are all one. Um, but I do think sometimes we can be a little bit too literal.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that's a division between the mind and the heart. What do you think?
You take it,
Tell
Tim. I'm
me.
not sure
Tell
I
me
get
I'm
what
all
he's
hosed up.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd want George to say a little bit more, but just kind of on the first blush, I think, um,
Oh, the first question about strongest religious feelings. So he's going about the strongest religious feelings.
Hmm.
Okay, so yeah, and we do have strong religious,
the first question from the
like our
discussion or the
icebreaker, maybe. Yeah, about the
Hmm.
strongest religious feelings. Yeah, and I suppose some of those could be intellectual, but I feel like I feel like there's a unity between the mind and the heart. But God doesn't always use our intellect to access us. You said that when we have strongest feelings in nature, etc., when thinking about it, that's not the thing. Yeah. Well, I thank you for your comments, George. I really think that I think it's important for us to all respond individually to the text, and I think it's I think it's important too, that we all have different responses, and they're good. And also, what I found when I read The Everlasting Man over and over, because it's probably the fourth or fifth time that I've read it, I have had different responses every single time that I've read it. And if you
Hmm.
ask me this question, uh, at different points in my life, certainly about feeling closest to God, it would have different responses at different points in my life. And my response today would definitely not be a response that I would, probably have in 10 years, or maybe it would. It's pretty intense to have a baby, but, I'm just saying.
Um,
So thank you for your comments. I really appreciate that. And so we're going to talk now about who Jesus Christ is, and the next question is a provocative one. It's, if Jesus is simply to Christianity what Moses is to Judaism or Muhammad is to Islam, what was the mistake the church made about him? Okay, so from the text on page 340, we see Chesterton say, even if the church had mistaken his meaning, it would still be true that no other historical tradition except the church had ever even made the same mistake. Mohammedans did not understand Muhammad and suppose he was Allah. Jews did not misinterpret Moses and identify him with Jehovah. Why was this claim alone exaggerated unless this alone was made? Even if Christianity was one vast universal blunder, it is still a blunder as solitary as the incarnation. So, wow. I guess it seems like what he's saying there is like nobody else makes this tremendous claim to be God, right? So we've got
It's
a
the
problem.
same. Yeah, it's the same as part one, right? It's a difference of kind and not degree. Like, we're not
Mhm,
talking about a person who led a religion who's sort of like the other guys who led a religion. This is a totally different
mhm.
kind of person.
Not just a good guy,
Yeah.
like a good teacher. We can't leave it there, is what he's starting to lead us into this argument, right?
Yeah, one of the things that one of my mentors, he frequently has pointed out in conversations with me and other folks, is that when you look at something like Acts chapter 17, Paul's sermon at the Areopagus, and that like he's there with Barnabas, and they're speaking with a group of Greeks, and Paul is addressing them and everything, and they think that Paul is Hermes because
Mhm.
he's
Mm,
talking so much and they're working these they're doing these wonderful works, and that Barnabas must be Zeus, and there was this mentor of mine points out that like incarnate deities was not something that was unusual
mm,
in the
Mm.
ancient world. But when you look at something like the first chapter of John, uh, and then
mm,
you start saying that the word became flesh, the logos became flesh, that is something on a completely different level. No other religion. It would be like walking up to someone and saying, "Have you met algebra today? Have you
mm,
met this abstract concept, that
Mm.
logic could take tea with you, or something like that, that like that was so far beyond even what these other religions had in their sort of incarnate deities, and it sort of dovetails even, I think a little bit in the into that language, which seems like a throwback to orthodoxy, where he's talking about kind of the insane person claiming to be God
mm,
is making such small claims,
Mm.
or such kind of unusual or peculiar claims, that like they couldn't possibly be true. Um, that the way that Christ claims to be God, it's almost like people who claim to be God uh, want to shout it on the street corners and from the
mm.
rooftops and things like that. And Christ frequently during his ministry told people to stop talking,
Yes.
about his
Yeah.
divinity so that he could get out there and teach,
Mm.
and then it's a completely different thing than what the world had ever seen before.
That's such a prescient point too about like the Hermes and Zeus thing because like how do they know? Why do they think that? Because Paul's talking a lot and because Barnabas was big and silent. It's like
Mm,
they have these personalities that fit,
mm.
but like how do you describe Christ's personality? Like try that ever.
Right. And I think that's a big challenge and a big contradiction because right,
Yeah.
all of these Greek gods were anthropomorphic. They resembled
And they were
humans.
stereotypes,
Yeah,
There's
in their
Right.
flaws and in their sins. And so now we have
Mm.
this perfect man, this sinless man who gets angry and who does things. So it's like what's going on here, and get angry and not sin, and all of these things that seem like contradictions all contained in this one person. He certainly defied the conventions of his age. He
Mm.
was not a strict rule follower,
Mm.
and that to the consternation of many of the religious authorities at the time. He knew that man was made for the Sabbath, and so or the Sabbath was made for man. Man was not
Mhm.
made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. Yes. So he knew that. He had things in the right order, and he could express them perfectly, unlike myself. So, which is beautiful. So what are the only possible reactions to Jesus' claim to be God? What a provocative thing. Again, I'm going to read the passage. Chesterton, answers Dale's questions beautifully. So we got to start with him first. And on page 342, he says, "For nobody supposes that Jesus of Nazareth was that sort of person. No modern critic in his five wits thinks that the preacher of the Sermon on the Mount was a horrible half-witted imbecile that might be scrawling stars on the walls of a cell. No atheist or blasphemer believes the author of the parable of the prodigal son was a monster with one mad idea, like a cyclops with one idea. Upon any possible historical criticism, he must be put higher in the scale of human beings than that. Yet, by all analogy, we really have to put him there, or else in the highest place of all."
Mm.
So this would be the lunatic argument, right? Like Jesus is either a lunatic or he's God, right?
Mhm.
So what's the only possible reactions? I mean, it seems in this passage he's saying, okay, he's crazy, or he's God, or maybe
Mm.
he's a bad guy. It seems like it'd be a bad thing, right?
It
To say you're God
highlights
if you're not.
Yeah, it's highlighting that division again that we've
Right.
talked about for the last couple of chapters. Like, you can't there's no neutrality with this, right? Like, you see this, you hear this, you receive this, and you gotta make a choice. Do you live for him or do you not?
Hmm. Right.
There's no in between, and that's why there's always been so much division regarding Christ.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I love that question. From C.S. Lewis, where he makes it really explicit. Lord, liar, lunatic. This is
Hmm.
makes it really explicit. But
I
then,
wonder where he got that idea.
yeah, you're right. Um, but then one of the things that I like about Chesterton is that he goes he kind of takes it in this really deep way, where then he holds up Christ next to insanity, and he's,
Hmm.
yeah, insane people seem to have like a fixation, or they seem to have some kind of disconnect, with reality. So, do we see Christ having a disconnect with reality? No, he's the most realistic. He has a plan. He has a story. He has an approach. He's going to tell a parable this way to to some of the disciples, and then he's going to talk to his apostles this other way and explain things, and it's wise and it's rich and it's deep, and like, okay, so he's not crazy. All right, well, is he a bad man? Well, let's compare him to bad men. If it's blasphemy to compare, to make oneself God, it usually doesn't stop there, right? That there's
Mm.
other
Mm.
blasphemies, that there'd be other wickedness, or something like that, that Christ would kind of be a party to, and yet we see him completely righteous, as touching the law, even more
Right.
so than Saint Paul. We see him extremely learned. We see him, doing everything. I love even the line from Aquinas, talking about when Christ was lost in the temple for 3 days. Christ was so righteous that he even just asked questions at the age
Mm.
of 12, despite knowing more than the scholars, because it would be inappropriate to teach those who are above you,
Mm.
in this way. So that, like, he was so perfect, so we see, all these great examples. So, like, okay, it doesn't look like it's going to be the liar or the bad man argument. Where does that leave us with?
Mm.
Right. And
Yeah, and he
sometimes
does.
in a
Yeah.
difficult spot,
Yeah.
it's that's a scary place to be sometimes, especially. I mean, these are wild claims. And then, unfortunately, this man who's also speaking so much truth doesn't say, "Come follow me and it's going to be all great." He says, "Pick up your cross and follow me." So his demands are really heavy. And if he's the Lord, he's not coming as some kind of genie in the bottle, granting us all our wishes. He's telling us that if we want to follow him, we have to suffer. Wow, what a deal. Who would sign up for that? That's that's pretty wild. But I guess he's pretty convincing.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't. It's interesting too because he doesn't have the qualities of a cult leader, right?
No.
At the very
Mm-mm.
least, at John chapter 6, right? All this hard stuff. Eat my flesh, drink
Mhm.
my blood. People leave. He's like, okay,
Yes.
are you gonna leave too? Like,
Right.
it's
He
not like
doubles
you,
down.
right?
He
It's not
doesn't
like,
say, "Oh,
but it's
come
not like
on."
you can't leave. You gotta
Right.
stay. It's like
Mm-mm.
if you want to leave, leave. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
trying to, you know. It is what it is. He's so, again, it's this whole like loftiness of God. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really need you. I'd love to have you,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
he's not adapting his message based on survey results.
right. And
He,
he's not
he's
like trying, and he's not trying to keep to control people and keep them in a, like that's what a cult leader does.
right.
They put people in a situation where they can't get out, they control them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jesus has been misrepresented as a cult leader, but that's
Oh,
clearly not what's happening here if you actually read the gospel. So, yeah,
no.
it's interesting.
Yes, he respects freedom in a way that none of these false gods or Greek gods are our imagination created gods that were like us.
Mm.
That we're looking for something different, and we're not allowing us the freedom of our own choices
And if
to
you stop worshiping them, you
right.
get punished and that kind of thing. Like,
Right. There's
yeah.
no one-to-one correlation with those types of things. So the
Mm,
rain falls on the just and the unjust.
mm.
So beautiful. So what is the paradox of the man who knows that he knows everything? Okay. This is funny on my Twitter account. I say, the more I know, the less I know, which has been used against me because people are like, oh, that means you're an idiot. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, okay. But Socrates, the wise man, according to Chesterton on page 343, Twitter's a bad place, so don't go there. The, just get rid of that with your
It's now
Netflix
called
account.
X because you should
Oh,
just put a
yeah.
big X on it.
Oh, good. That's a good
That's
point.
what
Yeah. I mean,
anyway.
unless you're looking up Chesterton, I mean, I don't know. If you follow Society of GKC on there, that's fine. But like, limit your audience and what you're looking at. But anyway, Socrates, the wisest man, knows that he knows nothing. The wisest man, Twitter people. A lunatic may think he is omniscient, and a fool may talk of, or a lunatic may think he is omniscience, and a fool may talk as if he were omniscient. But Christ is, in another sense, omniscient if he not only knows, but knows that he knows. Well, that's kind of deep. Thank you, Chesterton. So yeah, I mean, if I think I know everything, I'm a fool, right? I'm an idiot because I obviously don't know everything. But Christ talks as if he does know everything because
Mm.
he's God, and so he can speak with that authority. That's kind of what I think is a beginning to that idea. It's
Mm-hmm.
the paradox of the man. I mean, he doesn't know everything, right? Unless he's Jesus Christ.
Right.
Well, if I can
Please.
kind of refer back to even just
Yes.
that at the top of the hour talking about experiencing God, kind of in these small moments and things like that. I think the more the greater the gap is between, like, oh wow, I see 10 connections, I see 20 connections, uh, but you start to see how there's probably 1,000 connections,
Mm.
and you're just seeing a very small percentage of them, but that it seems like it's a recognition of the smallness of each one of us, uh, and that, I mean, there's kind of the old adage that, like, I know two truths: there is a God and I'm not him,
Mm.
uh, and that there is that kind of chasm, and I know we'll probably get to things, to some of this kind of later on, but just um, how perfect the gospel is, and the passion, and that you have sort of the height of well, human law in the Romans, and kind of the inheritors of Greek philosophy in some ways, and the height of human religion in Judaism, uh, and kind of the insufficiency of human efforts in order to be in order to save. Um, it's so great and glorious that the incarnation and the passion and the resurrection that it even opens the door to something that we clearly can't do on our own.
And we can't do it on our own. And it's so beautiful once you come to that realization that not only can't you do it on your own, you don't have to do it on your own. Because not only are you insufficient to do it on your own, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. So you don't have to have the strength. You don't have to be the one with all the answers. You can just rest in him. And I think this is such a beautiful thing. I was thinking when you were saying, I was thinking of the 12-step program where we acknowledge, that there's a God and it's not us. This idea that was so beautifully brought to a larger audience. That there is a God, and so we're so grateful that there's something outside of ourselves and there's something that's bigger than ourselves. Because how small is a world if it's contained within our mind? How small is
Mhm.
the universe if we can grasp all of it? That would be a really tragic, I think, and a shame. And we would lose all the mysticism and these connections. So it would be a much poorer life, certainly. So I'm glad I don't know everything, and that I don't pretend to know everything, unlike my friends on Twitter, who do know everything, and I'm a big dummy, which is fine, whatever. so, so what do we get from Christ's teachings? I mean, everything. But I loved this so much I had to put it in my on my Facebook page, which is another evil social media, but also fun way to connect with people. I said it is fitting. He says it is fitting on page 344 that the new man or the second Adam should repeat in so ringing a voice and with so arresting a gesture the great fact which came first in the original story of man in the Garden of Eden, of course, that man differs from the brutes by everything, even by deficiency, that he is in a sense less normal and even less native, a stranger upon the earth.
Mm.
What a beautiful refutation of Darwinistic evolution that says we're nothing more than evolved monkeys. I mean,
Mm.
this is part of what Chesterton's fighting against, this philosophy that informed H.G. Wells in this entire book, right? So this kind of, for me, condenses it into, that Christ is the antidote to the spirit of the age.
Yeah, there's another, if I could jump down, I think this dovetails really nicely to a question lower down. How does Christ's journey compare with the journeys of Jason and Odysseus? And he talks about Christ as having a return, you know what I mean? Like returning to and sort of setting things right. And that just seems to ring right with that quote too. It's like this idea that that man is not at home on the earth, and Christ kind of comes to set things right and to show him the way. It's just it's so beautiful. I love it. Sorry, didn't
That
mean to
is
jump
beautiful.
around. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's good. And so we talk about Christ's teachings, but what's the difference between Christ's teachings and Buddha's teachings? So for the messages are basically different. Chesterton says, on page 346, Christ said, "Seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added unto you." And Buddha says, "Seek first the kingdom, and then you will need none of these things."
Mm.
And I have to say, the Buddhist philosophy just terrifies me. This idea of like complete, just sort of self dissolution at the end, that's the state that, like union with one and then your personality disappears. I'm like, I just, I can't imagine. Like, no, I mean, I wouldn't exist. I don't know. This is horrifying to me. I want to exist. I want to exist with our Lord in heaven. I want to know my family. I want to know those people I love. I want to be an individual. God created me an individual with a soul, that He intended to live forever. So I'm, yeah, that is a huge difference for me that
Mm.
Chesterton points out there. And I think it's significant, right? What is the significance of that? Like pointing out that, Christ is saying that you seek first the kingdom of God and then everything's added unto you, a life of fullness, and Buddha with an idea of a life of complete abnegation.
Well,
What is,
complete abnegation is also like abnegation from pain, from distress, from all the things that nobody wants to deal with, right? But if you seek first the kingdom, all these things will be added to you. And like that includes all the things that are difficult. But like you just said, Susan, that we won't be doing them alone. They'll be more, they'll mean something in a way that they couldn't before, I think.
Absolutely.
Y-
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, no. I was just thinking. I don't remember exactly who introduced me to this kind of trichotomy, as it were, about the kind of the three approaches to suffering, the three possible approaches to suffering. That there's to the approach of trying to numb suffering through
Hmm.
drugs or alcohol or comfort or anything like that. That's what the world says. Then there's kind of the Buddhist attempt to just deny, and then
Mhm.
say that those the Buddhist teachings is that they don't exist, they don't matter. You just need to kind of block them out of your mind, and so then to deny. But then Christ comes to make suffering holy, to make it sanctifying.
Mm-hmm.
um but that it also, going back to something that I mentioned earlier, we don't worship creation, we worship with creation,
Mm.
Beautiful.
through the elements of creation. And that, um it it seems like if the Buddhist philosophy or theology, whatever it qualifies as, is true, it seems like it being an individual human person must be some kind of mistake then, some kind of cosmic exile, that's some kind of problem. If the point was to come from all and eventually return to all, then what's the point of being the individual in the meantime?
Right.
Whereas it seems much more humane, um, the way that Christ lays things out, and kind of um, the soteriology of Christianity, kind of in general, that when we get to heaven, we are going to be more ourselves. God willing, we get there. Um,
Right.
you
Because he
know,
redeems all things. And soteriology is the theology of salvation, right?
that's right.
So
Yeah,
that's the specific when we study that, we're studying how does God save us, and with what methods, and from a Christian perspective, that's through Christ, sacrifice on the cross. Yes. Yeah, and that when we get to heaven, there'll be a fulfillment. Yes. Yeah. And so the primary thing that Jesus does was seeking death, and the primary thing he was going to do was to die. I'm just going to give you the answer to that one, because I want to move on then to how does the death of Christ differ from the death of Socrates? Okay. We have that great account of the death of Socrates, of course. And GK says straight out, he says, no two things could be possibly more different than the death of Socrates and the death of Christ. They're both sort of self sacrificing, but how are they different? He says, we are meant to feel that the death of Socrates was, from the point of view of his friends at least, a stupid muddle and a miscarriage of justice, interfering with the flow of a humane and lucid, I had almost said, a light philosophy. We are meant to feel that death was the bride of Christ. Death was the bride of Christ, as poverty was the bride of St. Francis. We are meant to feel that his life was, in that sense, a sort of love affair with death, a romance of the pursuit of the ultimate sacrifice.
Mm.
Wow. So Jesus was born to die. He was born in that cave to go to this next cave, right? That we're going to get to at the end of this chapter.
I
Um,
have I have heard too that, studying the Shroud of Turin, it's pretty easy to see that Jesus should have died way
mm,
before he died.
yes.
Like he suffered so much, he lost so much blood, he was so broken. Like it was his divinity that was holding him there for 3 more hours on the cross. So like,
Mhm.
yeah, just this and in the meantime, right, 1 drop of his blood could have saved the whole world. But instead, he chose like the most gratuitous way to show us his most gratuitous love. I think that's an amazing paradox.
Yeah, superhuman suffering to show this divine love. Yeah. All right, I'm going to go to the last question because we already touched on Jason and Odysseus, and unfortunately, we're running out of time. But what converges at the foot of the cross, And what do they have in common at this point? And I found a passage on page 356 that says the mythologies and the philosophies were buried there, the gods and the heroes and the sages. And the great Roman phrase, they had lived, but as they could only live, so they could only die, and they were dead. So wow. So at the foot of the cross, these things died. What does that mean? What's he getting at there? Why is that his conclusion? What happened? Tim, you want to start with that one? It's like
deep.
it's so deep. I just want to meditate on his words.
Yeah.
Do you agree with it? Are you like, because something changed. Something changed when he was born. The incarnation changed the whole history of the universe. But like there was also this pivotal moment at the death of Christ. It was a very pivotal moment in the world's history too. So how did those things die?
Yeah, I think when I was reading this passage, and then kind of the end of the chapter talking about the third cave, and kind of the rebirth of human history, I was thinking about something that somebody pointed out to me recently, the way that the passion and resurrection changed something about human nature. That there's the great line from Saint Gregory of Nazianzus that whatever's not assumed is not redeemed or not saved. And that when Christ rose from the dead, human beings became the kinds of creatures that come back to life after death.
Wow.
That like there's this change to human nature, and all the more so kind of to the rest of human history. And also Aquinas gets into this, that is really beautiful about kind of there's this gap period of 33 years where the old law has not entirely passed away, but it's no longer binding, but the new law hasn't come into kind of into play yet. And it seems like there's just this incredible consummation that takes place on the cross, in that in that third cave. It's fitting that that's where our experience of human history begins, is the the cave at the beginning of the book. That's where we see man as kind of the aspirational artist, and then that Christ's life is bookended in this way. And it kind of it felt like a left hook, kind of towards the end of the book, that like, oh, there's another cave, come on, this is incredible, this is just beautiful writing. But that Christ had to redeem the world, and here we are with the Romans, who practically owned the world. It's all fulfilled in him, right?
It is fulfilled. And Chesterton, I think just helps us see the gospel story with fresh eyes, which was part of his goal. But we really do, and he points out these beautiful connections. Always the last sentence of any chapter that he writes is going to be a beautiful one. But this one is just such a lovely image. It says, what they were looking at was that first day of a new creation, with a new heaven and a new earth. And in a semblance of the gardener, God walked again in the garden, in the cool not of the evening, but of the dawn. It's like, he's been with us throughout human history, and he's still walking with us today. And it just brings it's emotional to think of that type of love, the love of this God that's willing to become like us, to lower himself to our humanity in order to redeem it, so that we might be with him forever. Even after we rejected him in that first garden, it's a love affair. It's a love affair. And he came and he loved the idea of dying for us, because that love was just so intense that he was born to do this. Yeah, Chesterton does a good job of bringing that to us, and that's why I'm so grateful for this book. So I think we have to end here. We've had some great comments in the chat. I know we've been chatting back and forth. We don't really have a ton of time for questions. I'm sorry today. It's Dale's fault. He put a lot of questions at the back of this chapter. They're not all like this. So please tune in if you want to be more active participants. We try, and we do care, and we always we always read our emails. So if you email us at podcast@chesterton.org, we would love to hear your comments. We'd love to hear your feedback. What does Chesterton mean to you? What did we do wrong? What did we do right? What would you like to see in the future? Let us know. We care about all of it. I want to thank Tim so much for being our special guest. You're amazing. I've always enjoyed spending time with you at the conference. And I'm really grateful that you were willing to come and spend time with us today. It was a great conversation. And so I really appreciate that.
Mhm.
And then go
I
ahead.
always enjoy talking to both of you, so it really was a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Tim. That's
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. And so next week, we're going to discuss Chapter 4, The Witness of the Heretics, with a conference favorite, a speaker, a longtime Chestertonian, a retired professor, Deacon Tom Martin. It's going to be a phenomenal conversation, so do not miss it. It will be great. We would love if you would support our work at any level. We're talking $5 a month, $10 a month. I could pull a Mother Angelica and ask for you to be between the gas bill and the electric bill. Cancel your Netflix and support our work. Be like Tim. It's a good thing to do. You can become a knight and support the apostolate of common sense. We would love to bring more content like this to you. We would love to help you grow closer to the everlasting man. We would love to help break open Chesterton for you, and your regular support. Make sure that we can make that happen for you. So thank you so much for your support. We love all of you. We appreciate your comments. And I want you to remember that Chesterton is always better with friends.